Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
Chapter 4. Victorine's Secret. In the next few months, Teresa discovered that she missed Bessie now that she was gone. She was also glad that Duke had to stay in London more often. She didn't want people to think the wrong thing if she and Duke lived in the castle together, and she insisted that Mrs. Hawtrey move into the castle for that reason. Old friendships were renewed as autumn and winter passed, and Teresa agreed to become her cousin's wife. Mrs. Hawtrey was offended and left the castle immediately. The other person to be affected was Victorine, who suddenly became less energetic and began to look and act like an old woman. Teresa went to stay with Duke in London and thought that Victorine would prefer to stay at the castle, but this angered Victorine. She came to London but argued with Teresa. "You are not grateful for all I have done for you," cried Victorine. "You do not care about my love for you when I was young and strong, or about the secret that we share." Teresa went up to her and held her hand. "What do you mean, Victorine? What is the secret that we share?" "As if you do not know. You know I make my own medicines. I also learned to make poisons, and I learned it for you." Teresa's face went white, and she could not move. She stared at Victorine. "Yes, my darling, I had the poison ready for the Count, but he saved me the trouble. He deserved to die because he punched you." "Let us not think of those days, Victorine. They have gone now, and we should try to be happy together." "Yes, and you should be grateful to me because all your happiness is due to the fact that I succeeded the next time." Teresa could hardly speak. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "The doctor wanted her to sleep, and I helped her to do it. And now she is asleep forever so that you can enjoy your life. I did it for you." That evening, Teresa told Duke that she wanted to go back to the castle. He was surprised, but when he saw how sad she was, he agreed to let her go. However, he missed her very much and wrote to her often, although her replies seemed dull to him. Teresa lived with Victorine and Bessie's daughter in the castle, but her life was miserable and lonely because of what she knew. She pleaded with Mrs. Hawtrey to come and stay with her, and at last she agreed. When Duke returned to the castle, he was dismayed to see Teresa looking so tired and sad, and could not understand what was wrong. The doctor advised that they should spend a few weeks at the seaside, and although Teresa insisted that there was nothing wrong with her, she finally agreed, and Duke made all the arrangements. However, he decided that he would not take Victorine, and left her at the castle without telling either Teresa or Victorine about his plan. When Victorine discovered that she had been tricked, she was very angry and became so ill that the servants called the doctor. Mrs. Hawtrey sat by her bed and waited for the doctor, but Victorine, in her anger, told her that she had poisoned Bessie and repeated the story to the doctor when he came. Teresa had a happy day at the seaside with her husband. He had to return to London briefly the next day and was very sad to leave. On his way to London, he was met by one of his servants from the castle, who told him that Victorine was dying and gave him a note from Mrs. Hawtrey asking him to go home immediately. When he arrived, the doctor told him that Victorine insisted on seeing him and getting his forgiveness. "However," he said, "you should read this confession first. I wrote it down as she said it to me." Duke read the note 3 times. "She is mad," he exclaimed, but his blood ran cold. He went up the stairs to see Victorine, who whispered that the story was true. She had poisoned Bessie so that Teresa could marry him. The effort of waiting for him and speaking to him made Victorine very weak, and a moment later she died. Duke had a long conversation with the doctor and then wrote a message to Teresa asking her to send Bessie's daughter to the castle. Teresa was puzzled by this strange request, but did as she was asked. A few days later she received a letter from her husband saying that Victorine had died, but had not been able to keep her awful secret. "All I can think of is my poor murdered Bessie and the cruelty of that awful woman. I loved you too, Teresa, but now we are strangers. By the time you receive this letter, my daughter and I will have left England. I do not know what we will do next, but my agent in London will look after you." Teresa read the letter and immediately called for a horse so that she could ride to Dover, but when she arrived, all she could see was the distant white sails of the ship carrying her husband and his child away. It broke her heart, and she lies buried in Dover Cemetery. After many years, Duke returned to England, but his place in Parliament was no longer reserved, and his daughter's husband sold Crowley Castle to a stranger.